Hi, everyone, and welcome to Life Unpotted. If you join us regularly on Thursdays, you'll know that this is where we leave space for our community series where we discuss questions, insights, comments, whatever it is that our listeners want to hear. We talk about that. Right now, we aren't getting a ton of questions, but we love podcasting twice a week. So today is not going to be a community series question, but it can still be a community series placeholder if you have any questions that you would like to ask us or statements you'd like to say. You can still submit them, and we will still gladly talk about them on our Thursday episodes. With that being said, today we're just going to jump into us discussing a topic that it's kind of weighing on me right now, and I'm going to be using this episode to really process when you are at a point of maybe major growth where you start questioning everything around you. And I don't mean necessarily your identity or what you're doing. I'm talking about specifically, for me in this case, to niche it down, this podcast, Life Unpotted, this community, where I'm not sure what it is that I'm doing. And I think it all begins with we get into so much rhythm just doing something, and then a moment hits us, maybe someone gives some kind of feedback that isn't a positive feedback. And it's not even that gets you questioning what you're doing in a bad way. It makes you question, what is my intention with doing this? And I want to refine what my intention is for this podcast, for this community that we're building. And this is something that I'm wanting to understand. And I'm hoping it's relatable to listeners in any case. If you're looking to pivot something in your life and understand, why does something feel different? Why was something that I once was so sure of, I'm now in a place of wanting to better understand my intention behind this. And again, this is not a bad thing. This is understanding and reevaluating your intention behind what you're doing, which I believe is a very natural thing to do when you're on the long course of doing something. So I'm trying to understand, what is it that we're offering? Because we just started this podcast as a way to overcome our own self-limiting beliefs, our own way to help process things that help us change our life, that help us change our mind, help us change the way we experience this exact moment. And that is what made me feel connected to the podcast when we had no listeners, when we had no intention with where we wanted this to go. It was simply us sitting in front of the mic, pushing through the self-limiting belief that there's no way that we can let go for the period of this episode for 45 minutes. There's no way we can let go and just let our thoughts go and let them out into the mic, let them out. There's no way, like that used to be something that was really hard to get out of my own way, to stop thinking so much about something. Because once I would start thinking so deeply about something, I wouldn't be able to flow. I wouldn't be able to get into that flow of just talking out of my subconscious, because our subconscious holds so much information that on a day-to-day basis, we just are not aware of. And that was the start of this podcast, and we've overcame that. So I think now reaching a point where we're able to do that, we sit down, we check ourselves, and we talk about things. It's easy for things to start to become formulaic where you know it works, but you're like, why? I'm not necessarily feeling connected to this. I'm not necessarily understanding why I'm doing this other than the fact that I just do this every Tuesday. I do this every Thursday. And I think the path of wanting to be connected to what you're doing always comes back to this. I think it's always wanting to understand, why am I doing this? And I think it's a natural process to understand where you're going. It's to revisit where you came from. And it gets to a point where you think that you are something. You see people reacting and creating ideas of who you are, of what you are. And then maybe you start responding to those things. If I should be in response to what it is that they want. I can change, oh, right, I'm just going to change what I'm doing so I can respond to how they expect me to be, because that's how I've been. And I think that this is maybe something that content creators understand, is wanting to be putting things out there that we feel connected to. And I think it's just reevaluating, why am I doing this? Why the hell am I doing this? And I don't know. I think it's so easy for us to want to change ourselves in the process of doing something that we only got here because we were just being ourselves. We were just working through the intricacies of our mind. And it gets to a place where you question, should I not be doing that anymore? And you start to get stuck into this web of the mind. And I find that when we get stuck in the web of the mind, we're thinking too much. We're not going to be able to solve a problem with the problem itself when the problem itself is just thinking. There's nothing here. I'm not an authority of any means. I don't know what it is that I'm talking about. I'm understanding and I'm learning with the process. So I think at times it can feel uncomfortable to start to be confident in what you're offering, to be confident in what it is that, what kind of podcast do you have? What is it about? People want an authority figure. And I think it can feel uncomfortable to bridge into that territory when you only started all of this just to learn about yourself and to push through your own self-limiting beliefs. So I'm not sure what any of this means. I just know that it's weighing heavy on me. And I really am questioning everything that has to do with this podcast. It feels very uncertain and I don't know why I'm doing it. So I'm just trying to get back to a state where this episode means something to me. Because if it means something to me and if I actually work through something, I know that's of value to someone else because it may help them work through something. Because I'm not trying to make this for anyone else. I'm well aware of the best things that are created are things that are just created for yourself. It's because you like this. It's like the art of something immediately falls apart when you're trying to create it for someone that you have in mind, hoping that they'll like it because you're thinking. And when you just let go and you just let your soul meet whatever it is, you let your soul out of your mouth, you flow. It's then when we aren't thinking. And it's then when something comes through us that is useful and it is helpful. So I'm trying to get back to that place by not trying to be anything, not trying to have an agenda, not trying to come off in a certain way, but just showing up, because that was where I was always connected to this podcast. And that is what this podcast was founded on. So that is what I want to get back to.
It's interesting because I definitely can relate to the sentiment of feeling a little lost, but where I'm at is recognizing I feel a little lost today. I feel a little unmotivated today. I feel a little tired and drained today, but do I have to think this has anything to do with this brand we're building? Like, do I have to start assigning this emotion, this feeling state of meh or uncertainty or unknown to something external? And I think that is probably the primary basis of what's going on here. But I think there's a lot of logical thought that is getting you to your thought process. And I think a big thing to mention is the traditional way that businesses have been built. If we're looking at the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years, many businesses, at least the ones that we have been familiar with, so those are maybe the jobs we have worked for people, we've worked for employers, have been structured employer to employee. I am building this company and I'm selling a product, I am offering a service. And in a large way, there has been a huge disconnect between the person selling and the product that they're offering. And we see this with major brands that have taken over our society. We were talking about this on our community Zoom last night, like Coca-Cola, or even if we're talking about like Roundup, Monsanto, pesticide weed killer, that now all those lawsuits are happening because they're suing these big corporations. So I think when we look at how our society has been run by big corporations, a lot of the time, if not most of the time, there's been a large disconnect between society, the consumer, and the creator. And I think this huge shift has happened since after COVID with the boom of content creation and the boom of TikTok, where all of a sudden, people are building personal brands. And to somebody who maybe, say the classic example of, you always see on TikTok, right? Like when we're talking about should people go back to the office? It was like boomers will say, no, you better be in that office 5 days a week. You better be going down the path that I went on. And I'm not getting into why we should be in an office or why we shouldn't, because I think there's a lot of sound and logical reasons for both. But the underlying premise there is a deviation in what we have done in society to what is happening, a shift. There is a shift happening in the way that we work. You see our friend, the Daily Victorian, who is a content creator and has a huge community that's built off of her vulnerability. It's built off of her just being herself. And I think I've had thoughts where the mind does come in of what I've learned of what makes a business, meaning you have to be deceitful. You have to not care about what you're putting out there. You have to just do it for the money. Do it for the money. And coming from a job where I was doing it for the money, I think, and many of us have learned that, and not undermined throughout this whole consumer world that we've lived in the past since we've been alive. I am sure there have been so many jobs and industries that people were, maybe they weren't highlighted in mainstream corporate America, but they were following their own path. Maybe that was the ski instructor who taught a ski class. And I'm not sure if that really gets to where we're going, because there you still have dynamic of authority or instructor to someone who's learning the information. And I think what I'm trying to get at here is that there's this big shift now where the product and what you're creating is more than just a product that we're selling and saying, hey, you need this to change your life. But what it's becoming now is community, vulnerability, and just being yourself. And it's confusing sometimes. It's like, why is being myself? Why is this valuable? Why is me being me valuable? And you go and you look at people like the Beatles, who we were watching across the universe the other day, and they were playing the Beatles soundtrack. And the day after, I was looking up the history of the Beatles and watching these crazy videos of the Beatles showing up to like a tour in Australia, and people just going crazy for them. Or you look at someone like Alan Watts, or famous painters or artists, people who are more creative, how we've admired their work. We've admired these poets, these musicians, these writers, not because they're telling us they're better than us, not because they're telling us that there needs to be this creator to consumer, there needs to be this big gap, but there's this message. And you see this with someone like Noah Kahan. To the listener, if you're not familiar with Noah Kahan, he is one of our favorite artists, and he has blown up over the past year, and his music is so vulnerable. It is so open. He is doing stuff that musicians have not done. He's like creating all these collabs where he brings on these musicians, and he did a collab with Casey Musgraves, and he would just have her do a snippet of the song and he'll put it in. And maybe a musician back then would say, what are you doing? Why are you just getting someone to record a 5-second component on their computer and dropping into your MP3, and then you're making that a new song? And it's like, but he's just doing his own thing, and people love that. And I'm not sure, I don't even know where that is going, but what I'm trying to say is that why have we even built businesses, or where did this idea come from that if you're profiting off of something, if you're selling something, if you're making money off of something, then you have to be bad? That, and this is where so we were talking about on Zoom last night again, of like, you get mad at yoga instructors or yoga studios for having expensive classes. And obviously we can understand that, yes, okay, maybe there's something to talk about there. But why do we get mad at wellness and holistic providers who have good intentions for making a profit, But we don't get mad at these big brands like Coca-Cola or these big corporations for selling things expensive or Gucci or whatever it is that maybe we don't think isn't benefiting society. Like, why have we collectively decided as a society that we're going to spend our money on shit that doesn't matter, that is toxic and poisonous and is harming all of us? But then there's this certain idea that if you're creating something good for the world, the ego comes in and goes, is this valuable? And maybe that's your ego coming in, just to circle back to what you're saying. Like, maybe that is your ego coming in of being like, you know, what's the point of all this? And maybe the point is recognizing that there doesn't have to be one besides the power of vulnerability, authenticity, and emotions, the forefront of our humanity.
First of all, what comes to mind with you paralleling these big corporations making it okay to profit as opposed to smaller creators not being able to profit. It's something that's like deeply cemented into our psyche on a cultural, societal level. Maybe that is changing. But what comes to mind for me first is that, first and foremost, a brand is a brand. A brand is just an idea, and someone doesn't have that in their life, and they want that in their life. And we see how this is often used in a negative way. The way we see like Coca-Cola, you know, ton of sugar, we have high diabetes mortality rates in the US, but attaching an idea to it, and I am not up to date on the most recent Coca-Cola commercials, but oftentimes it's like their slogan was like share a smile. And that's associated with Coca-Cola. Or like Vans. I love Vans. I just ordered a pair of Vans. Why did I order Vans? Why was that the first shoe that I ordered? Because I just like what they stand for, and I don't even know what they stand for, but their branding has just painted a picture in my subconscious mind of what that means. Now, we're totally fine forking over $60 for a new pair of shoes from Vans. And I'm not even saying Vans is a bad corporation. I have no idea. I think Vans is like off the wall. They've always been kind of creative and this and that. But nonetheless, they have an ethos. They have an offering that when you put this on, you're going to feel what it is that they've created. Maybe it's artsiness. Maybe it's something that's different. Maybe it's something that's creative. Maybe it's something that, you know, maybe a famous musician wore their shoes in the 80s. And I don't even know who it is, but that's cemented in my mind because I'm associating me with that. This is how brands work. And brand making, it can be a very fascinating thing because when used for good, it's enhancing people's lives. But to switch this over to content creation or podcast creation, which I guess falls under content creation, it's becoming much more niche and it's becoming very vulnerable. Like thinking of our friend Victoria, what she offers is invaluable. It's her attaching herself, her personality to yoga. And sometimes it's really hard to find a yoga instructor who's just themselves and not trying to be something. That in itself right there is invaluable. And the moment I saw her, it's why I immediately signed up for her app, because that was invaluable to me. That's her brand. That's an ethos. There's something there that I wanted to bring into my life. So I think with this whole conversation of why isn't it okay to pay for content creators? Why isn't it okay to pay for what they offer? Maybe it's because we've gotten convoluted with this idea of influencer marketing, how they're offering us, you should get this Christmas tree this year, you should get this, where it's all about products that they're pushing out that brands are paying them big bucks for. And maybe that's where the negative association came from, but not even.
Well, I just want to clarify, whose negative association we're talking about. Is this yours and mine?
Well, I think it's more just on a larger scale. I'm not really even putting too much emphasis. Maybe it is just mine. Maybe it's something that's shared. But I think it's more or less just thinking about why is it that we want certain things and why do we justify paying for a pair of Vans, but I wouldn't justify paying for a yoga app. But it's almost like a yoga app is easier to justify because you're getting something that you wouldn't get without paying, as opposed to bring in the third model of something like Patreon, where we make pretty much everything free here. And if what we're offering here is vulnerable, conversation, unfiltered conversation, that maybe that's something that you want in your life and you don't know where to see it. You don't know where to get it. So, but you see it here on this podcast and you want to pay in a donation-based manner. That is, I think, maybe where people struggle the most of like, well, why would I pay for that? But if it's something that you are looking for in your life, if it's something you want to support and it's something you don't want to go away, I think that's the model. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm trying to understand and feel confident in like saying, I'm just being myself. I'm just being here. This is my offering. It's this podcast. It's this conversation right now. It's us being vulnerable on a live podcast where people will listen that we don't know. And that's fine. That is important. It's important to me that people find conversations that will help them see that they're not alone in what they're thinking. And bringing this back to brands, that's a brand. The brand is that you see something that you like, you see something that you want to be like, something that you can take from that you can incorporate into your own life, and you pay for it. So how is it different to pay $60 for a pair of Vans that will make you feel a certain way when you put them on? When we host an event and I'm wearing Vans, as opposed to if I was wearing Birkenstocks, it's going to make me feel different. And it's very minor. You could say that doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't matter on the larger scale of things. But there is a part of me that does like that. So bringing that back to, well, why wouldn't I pay $5 a month to the podcast that I love? Like there's something inside of me that still thinks that isn't the same offering there. There's some kind of discrepancy. And I'm trying to understand if that's just me.
It sounds like an insecurity that maybe you don't feel like what you're offering is valuable. And I think I can probably understand why, because I've gone through this thought process before, and you're living this life. Like, we spend every single day doing intense work of questioning our thoughts. Like for me, like I have intensely journaled for the past 3 years. I've been in intense therapy. I've worked through so much shit. And so have you. It might feel like everybody else has also done that. But the reality of it is, why did I spend all of my time listening to Mel Robbins and Jay Shetty and Tara Brach and Michael Singer the past few years? Because I felt lost. I felt like the world was closing in on me and I didn't know what to do. And just because now you're in a place where you can understand that you're not who you think you are, that is your perception. So of course, sitting here doing this podcast, you might feel like, oh, what value is this? How can this be anything that grows? How could this be any of that? But the person on the other side listening is like, just hearing you guys work through this is so valuable, because if that was me a few years ago, I would not know how to access the insights and the knowledge that we have done the work to get. And a huge thing we're always saying, it's not that these are insights that we can only find, but we chose to dig through the insight tunnel and to work through things. So now we're just saying, here are all the jewels we found. Here's all the stuff we found. Maybe it'll resonate, maybe it won't. There's no truth to anything in life, but here's what we found. And that's the value.
Yeah, I see that.
Is that you're putting in time and effort, and you don't have to spend all of your days writing and creating this art. And the podcasting is an art. It's no different than writing a book. Maybe it's become more mainstream, and maybe it's become more this and that idea in your head of judgment of, oh, it's just another podcast. But this is not a podcast. This is art and humanity and emotions and the truth of this existence, that when you walk outside and go to your job or go to the supermarket, people will not look at you and acknowledge you, and will be in this divisive world, because most people don't understand that we're all connected. Most people are living in fear and anxiety and don't know how to relax. So, of course, you can have Noah Khan getting on stage and is like, oh, I sing these songs every single day in my house. What value is this? But when I put on his music, it changes my whole day. I feel seen. And even if that's us getting up here right now and being open about the fact that we're insecure about what we're creating, you know how many people that can validate who are also creating things who feel insecure?
So it's almost like there's this deception that if you're creating something, then you need to be something, meaning you need to change your natural state and fit the mold of what you think you need to be in order to create and be successful at something, in order to grow something. And I'm protesting that directly. I think that's the wall that I've been walking up against, of thinking I need to be something, because I refuse to try to be something, because that's the antithesis of what this conversation represents to me, is that exact thing.
And what do you mean by you don't want to be something? What would it mean to you if you were something on this podcast and in this brand? What does that look like?
Okay, so that could mean straying from talking about what I'm actually feeling, because I always want to be true to what I'm actually feeling and talking about it on this podcast, as opposed to me being like, I'm feeling this way, so we're talking about it, opposed to me saying, let's talk about how to build your brand, or let's talk about how to get out of your head. Because to me, that's not vulnerable, because that doesn't match where my current state is. So I think I was getting to a place, and the wall I was hitting was that, oh, I need to think of the idea that we're going to talk about and make sure that I know what I'm talking about, so that it's helpful and clear for the consumer to consciously and clearly and easily consume that. But that's not at all what we offer. That is a offering model, and that works for some people. But that is not inherently what we're offering. What we're offering is no more than simply our experience. We have no answers, but all we have to offer is our experience, and that we have committed to doing what we're doing, and that we're just doing it, and we're just figuring it out and realizing that we don't have to be what our mind tells us that we are. And that's all it literally is. It's that lived experience. And to say that's all that it is, that is everything that we experience in life. And like you said, Soph, when you're walking out to go to your job, when you're walking out to go to school, when you're walking out, pick your kids up, whatever it might be, to be able to, for 20 minutes, listen to someone who has committed their life to thinking about these things, doesn't mean that I know anything different than you. It means that I've committed the time to access these things and to think about these things. And it's really just the time I've put into committing to this. That is all it is. There's no difference. Like, there's no answers that I have.
And how much time do you think you've spent healing and looking at yourself and confronting these deep and dark and painful emotions? Like, how much time has this spent in the past few years for you? Because for me, it feels like every waking second of my life.
Well, it's not in my entire life, but it's really been the last 3 years. My life has not been, I've sacrificed a lot of things, but because I've recognized that joy doesn't come from those things that I've sacrificed. Joy, inner happiness, love, those things come from my inner state. So I've decided my life is committed to working on my inner state, because it's through my inner state that I see the world. So if my inner state is not good, if my inner state is shit, I could be on a luxury boat that is serving me champagne, and I could be not happy. I could see it as shit. I could feel like I want to be mean to everyone. I know that is true. That is fact. So I've recognized, and I'm confident, that your inner state matters more than quite literally anything else. And it's a journey that you have to commit to, but I've committed to that journey because I want to create things that are inspired from realizing that our inner state is triumph to anything else. And if I can make one impact on someone else through richening my inner experience, through honing my inner experience of just being, well, that's what I want to do, because I know everyone has access to the tools and inside themselves to do that. It all begins with one person. Like, the reason I'm sitting here today is because there's one line from Glennon Doyle's book Untamed that made me realize that I have control over my decisions. It was just one single line that changed my entire life. So going back to saying, well, yeah, I'll pay $60 for a pair of Vans, but I'm not going to pay $20 for someone's thoughts because they're not qualified. They don't know what they're saying. They're just a person writing. We tend to do that until someone says, I'm a writer, so buy my book. It's one of those things where it's like, you don't actually have to commit to being anything. You can just put yourself out there. And that's what Glennon Doyle did. She was a writer. I don't know what I'm trying to say with that. But what I'm saying is that if what you're offering is your thoughts, that is invaluable, because people need those thoughts. People need thoughts in general. And I think where I've gotten in my head is that I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to be controversial. I don't want to upset someone. But we can't live our life through that lens. We have to live our life through the lens of believing in what it is that we're doing. We can't always be so afraid of offending someone, because if we do that, then we're not going to make any change, because we're only going to be telling people what they want to hear. And that doesn't feel right. That feels not right. So I think just getting to a place where we can recognize that I'm just being me. And if people find value in that, then that's great. But I don't need to convince anyone to find value in that, because it's going to come to those who want to hear it. And that's all that it is. I'm not trying to be anything. And I think that I've been so afraid of that ever since we got a piece of negative feedback from one experience that was one person's experience. And I think that really just got in my head to thinking of, I need to make sure that I'm thinking of the person listening in mind, to make sure that I don't upset them, offend them, or make them unhappy. But that's not why we started this podcast. This podcast was started as a way to process difficult things that change the way we see our life. And a lot of them happen to be very uncomfortable. But that's where beauty comes, is when we can sit through uncomfortable facts and take accountability for them.
And the reason anybody who would ever approach you in that type of manner with hostility or with anger is because they need to hear this conversation. Like, they need to recognize that it's not all about them, and that they have to look at their pain to free themselves from being able to have real and open conversations with people. And of course, a huge part of this conversation is that we are looking at this old way of living. We're looking at this old paradigm, if you want to call it, and we're pioneering a new way forward. And it was making me in my head, I was thinking of, like, TV shows I watched growing up as a kid, like Slime Time Live. It was like this show where, like, you just watch people, like, I don't even know, like, trivia shows, like stupid shit that isn't stupid, but I found value in it when I was younger. But that's exactly it. I found value in it. People find value in hearing you work through things. This is a show. This is a podcast show. This is a place where we are offering valuable insight by working through life. And that is the biggest reason why we're all freaking suffering, is because we go through this life and no one pauses us to say, hey, you don't have to wait till you're 70 years old, till you're on your fucking deathbed to be happy. You know that you're alive once and then you're going to get buried into the ground. So it feels like this insecurity that you have, that I have too, is just another thing we're letting go of from the illusion and from this ego-built society that we've created to think that, oh yeah, let's spend all of our time making stupid products that serve no value. Let's support these companies that are destroying our planet, destroying people, but let's not take our time and energy to wake up the world so that people can take this knowledge. Say someone's listening to this podcast who's passionate about climate change, but feels like that doesn't matter because we've been taught that the earth, whatever, that's nonprofit. We don't care about nonprofits. It just goes back to that too. Like, how nonprofits were always not as important to big corporations, but that's where the real work is happening. So we're going to prioritize giving money, and this is why I left my little job. I'm going to prioritize my time on this planet to fund commercial real estate properties for rich investors to make them richer so they can go do whatever they're doing. And who knows if they're like beating their wife, or they're an alcoholic, or this is just something they're building with all their money, but they're not contributing at all to this higher consciousness, this higher awakening of a high, enjoyable quality of life, of something that matters. And we've been so brainwashed to think that, yeah, let me spend my whole life working for somebody to put more sky rises. And I'm not saying we don't need real estate. I'm not saying we don't need real estate. I'm saying there are so many jobs that do not need to exist. And that's probably what's going to happen with AI, that human beings really be spending their time, all those hours of a day, working on that stuff, working on these jobs. Or should we be shifting society so that maybe like the New York City just flooded? Like, we're in Texas and it's freezing. Like, what is going on with our planet? Like, that's something I'm not privy to, but it should be, right? So why are we not learning that ever in school? Why? It just goes back to this whole system that is so inherently flawed. And there's 8 billion plus people on this earth. So if we sit here and we say, we are not offering value because I'm not a banker, or I don't have this product that's going to trick you to think that you're going to feel better about yourself. Like, buy this coffee, you'll be happier. Buy this mascara, you'll be happier. You're feeding into the fucking problem that's creating all the suffering to begin with. So all of that to say is, you need to, and I need to, and anybody else out there who's trying to make a difference in this world needs to recognize that it's okay for money to shift hands, to go from greedy people who don't give a shit about society to people who want to make a difference, to help wake up this world and bring people back and recognize that we're meant to enjoy life.
Wow.
Did that land?
Yeah, it did. You said a lot there. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, look, like, yeah, this right here, it's not a gimmick. Like, this is our life. And everything that you just said, of every day we make a choice if we want to give control to the powers that be, aka us and our ego, not taking accountability for questioning, why am I having 80 grams of sugar today? Why am I having 16 Coca-Colas? We're never getting sponsored by Coca-Cola. Anyway, it's a matter of realizing that when we think of the way the world is, like, you go on TikTok and you see people talking about, I can't handle another waking day. I'm so burnt out. I can't pay my mortgage. I can't buy a house. I'm working so hard and I have nothing to show for it. And I feel trapped and I feel stuck and everyone's getting richer and I'm getting poorer. It's interesting to look at kind of what you said, like the shifting model of, it's up to us. We don't have to support these huge corporations that we feel like we're being taken advantage of. We can question why it is that we are working with these big corporations to control us and to put us back into this position. Again, I'm not privy to this either, but it's something that is interesting to think about, the way that the model is shifting of where you want to spend your money and what you want to support, because do you want to have an outcome within our society that's different than where it is now? And if that's the case, we have to do something, and we have to spend our money differently than how we've been spending it if we want to see a change. Because if we stopped all shopping at name brand shop, if every single person or 80% of the population decided to do that, like, the power is in the people. And I'm not saying anyone should do that, but I'm just saying it's an important thing to remember that you always have more control or more power than you think you do. It's when you refuse to accept that you're limiting yourself and you're not able to see what potentiality there is for this world. And I guess that's why we're here. I guess that's what this podcast is. It's a real podcast. It's not trying to be anything. It's two people talking about why are we here? Where do we want to go? And what can we do about that? How can I take accountability? It's acknowledging that there are truths to the human experience that are unpleasant. And that's not unique to anyone. That's just part of the human experience. And that's okay. And it's actually beautiful, because when you acknowledge that darkness, it's when true beauty is sprouted, because we're no longer running away to distractions. We're looking to ourselves to find the answer, because it's only within ourselves that we find the answer. If we're not looking to ourselves, we're just looking for distraction. And people will take advantage and people will exploit that. That's what happens in our society every single day. But it's not the exploiter. It's the person who's not taking the accountability to look to the answers that are within themselves. And
it's both the creator of the product that's destroying the world and the consumer of the product who continues to buy it. It's a circular cycle of we are society. We are the decision makers who decide, do we want to perpetuate the endless list of problems that have been going on in our world? Okay, we're talking about this on the Zoom last night. Okay, maybe I'm not going to go and protest, but I will take my time now to build something that is of value. You know, we are going to expand. Our brand is expanding. Eventually, we're going to be offering more products like journals, clothing, all sustainably created. We will be partnering with environmentally friendly brands to bring this message in of how can we improve our planet. We will work with companies like non-alcoholic companies or maybe cannabis companies or tools at medicinal, herbal, plant medicine. This conversation, this is just the podcast, right? And it's not just the podcast, but there are so many different avenues that we have planned. We have retreats planned. We have in-person events planned. Like Life Unpotted, it's going to blossom into a big brand with so many different avenues of ways that we're holistically impacting this planet. The first step, though, for anyone to do any of that is to recognize they're not their thoughts. And the funny part of it is, like, it's like we're talking about this in a Zoom last night, like we have the web of thoughts. All of this is all part of that web. My business doesn't matter, what I'm creating doesn't matter, there's no value, no one's listening to this podcast. Because I can assure you that most of people listening to this podcast probably have not thought that, because that is your perception. Someone could discover this podcast new today and their life has changed because they heard someone validate the fact that maybe they are the one creating their suffering.
Well, I mean, that's the truth. That's what it is. It's like we need people to realize that they're not their thoughts, so they can realize that their brain telling them or their mind telling them that they shouldn't go and they shouldn't try to start something new. They shouldn't try to provide a value to the world because everyone's telling them that, how are you going to make money? How are you going to retire? How are you going to have this? And it's like those thoughts get to us. Yeah. But it's the power is in those who are willing to step out and create something that others don't understand, because what are we doing if we're not reaching for something that we don't totally understand? Because when we don't totally understand something, we're not just trying to get somewhere to get something, to get a check mark, to get a validation. We're trying to move from a place where we're at now. We're trying to inspire, we're trying to grow, and we're trying to expand, and we're trying to push, and we're trying to change. And you're right. That's a way I've never thought of it. Of if you are a responsible business owner, you can facilitate so much change that way, because there's inherent power that comes with that. And there needs to be power that is thinking of the collective, that isn't just thinking about themselves, because the power is not there right now. That's not where it is. So it's a matter of how many people can pop up and be responsible business owners in ways that are going to be thinking of the collective. That's powerful. That's exciting. And that's a future that I want to be a part of.
And that's exactly it. It's recognizing that shifting that business owners can be responsible, that you can create a business that does care about the collective and does care about our holistic society as a whole. And that's just something that I never knew, because I spent my time, like many of us did, seeing greed control the world. But we're shifting. There's a shift happening. And what happens when you build a community and you build a brand where you have like-minded people? You then have the ability to then use that for a good way. And that can be hard to understand, of actually using what you've built for something that's actually going to benefit our earth, not just thinking about yourself. So of course, it feels uncomfortable to start a business that's geared over recognizing that people are whole and complete as they are. That's geared in helping people recognize that they're not what they think. Because most of the time we've been taught that a product needs to be one that guarantees you that you're going to change your state. And we're here to let you know that that's all up to you. So we're giving you the tools to do that by having these conversations, by hosting these Zooms, by putting out the meditations, by creating this mindful, holistic, healing center and community and brand to facilitate that. And that was just another, it's funny in hindsight, we basically just worked through a whole insecurity. That's just an insecurity, right? That, Like, I used to think this growing up, like, nonprofits aren't as valuable. Like, my mom used to be like, go work for the government. It's like, no, I want to work for a big law firm. I want to be part of the prestige. I want to be part of the corporate America. And now it's like, oh, but all those not that was all actually betterment for the world. And for this one planet, we get our CO2 on that feeds all of the species that provides this entire ecosystem to exist. Oh, but we don't give a shit about it. Oh, joke's on us, because if a fire burns down your house, or if a tsunami because of climate change burns down your, like, destroys your house, then are we going to wake up that there's this force that gives us the habitat to exist to the T, that the carbon and atoms that exist on this planet give us the ability for this heart to function and for our eyes to work? Do you know how much of a miracle that is? But we have to sustain that. We have to maintain that. So we are the ones that have to take accountability. Otherwise, it's the whole, I don't know if it's a trolley thing. No, it's not the trolley thing, but the whole thing of, if it's not you, if you look to everyone else, we'll never change. So I think this is a really important conversation. I think so many people could benefit, whether you are a nonprofit or you are building a more sustainable brand or you are doing something that you recognize that, yeah, maybe it isn't going out in the traditional business model, but why aren't we talking about, oh, why don't we look at this traditional business models and maybe they're flawed, you know? Like, we're meant to grow, we're meant to evolve, we're not meant to stay in the same place. That's what innovation is. And we're just innovating in a new way. We're innovating in a way that's actually helpful and impactful. And I hope and I want to be in a part of a world where that is the direction in which we're going. And hopefully that happens within our lifetime. And it is already happening because people are waking up. And that's why this conversation matters.
Well, that's the reminder that I needed, because it's always important to question what you're doing and why you're doing it, and to think maybe everything's wrong or everything shouldn't be this way. And it's just recognizing that if you hit that place, it's a good thing. It's a good thing because there's a thought beyond that thought. There's a world beyond that limiting thought that you're having. And you know that. And you know you want to talk it through. But you don't want to talk it through with someone who's going to reinforce the old paradigm of thinking. Of, yeah, you should be afraid. You should do this. You should get a job. You should save. And you should be careful. And you should worry about the presidency and this. And you should worry about everything. Because that's not where the answers are. The answers are in you. And oftentimes, you have to get out of the web altogether. And you have to just tap back into your body. Because that's where the answers are. And this was a really helpful episode for me. It feels more authentic than an episode we've done in a while, because I think I've really been coming back into my experience and more out of my mind. I think it's been a long process of that happening, and that sometimes that's the case. And I'm glad that we were able to expand in this conversation and not try to fit with any constraints. Like, I feel like we really just talked, and that's what this podcast is about for me. It's just talking, experiencing, feeling, and brainstorming for a new way of being. We don't have to accept any truths in our life. And as long as we're able to sit in the unknown of not knowing where the answer is going to land without fear, I think that's where we're going to be able to get somewhere. And I feel re-inspired by this conversation because we just did that. We just had this experience. We just talked. We weren't trying to be anything. We weren't trying to get anywhere. I'm not thinking of any listener in mind. No offense. But that's not what this is for. It's not trying to fit the mold of what one exact person is looking for, because oftentimes when we do that, we're going to miss what they actually want, because what they actually want is what I actually want, because we're all having the same relative experience. It may differ, but we can't change ourselves based off what other people want. We can't change our entire platform based off what one person says about what they didn't like. That's not realistic. Like, this is just a place for us to exist. And if someone doesn't like that,
like, one
that's
thought,
okay.
like, do you think like a clothing brand, if someone commented like, oh, I didn't like that, they're gonna go back to their factory and be like, change this whole thing? Like, you take feedback, but you sort through the feedback to understand, okay, is this coming out of a place of fear and ego, or is this real helpful feedback? And I think goes back to conviction. Having conviction in what you're creating, what you're building, the life that you're creating.
Well, that was exactly what this conversation
Yeah.
was needed for, because I needed to relearn what that conviction was. And that was the only lesson for me.
And then maybe this really is where, it takes you to the next level of like, we have been thinking I want to start a series of bringing people on to talk about the environment and environmental products and sustainability. Like, we start to grow and expand to realize it isn't just about us. Like, this is a movement. This is a mission to grow a community, to get the word out there. And there will never be anybody else who's exactly like you with your lived experiences who can do that. So thanks for being open, because I could definitely see how someone who's building something wouldn't want to be open to the fact that they have no idea what they're doing. And hearing from somebody who has put so much time and effort into creating a community, be honest about how the mind can trick you to thinking something's wrong. And it's about working through it. It's always about working through it, because there's always something you can get to on the other side. There's always another thought after the thought. So thank you.
Well, this was a great combo, and excited to keeping up the authenticity of being connected to where I'm at and just sharing that truthfully without trying to be anything, because I find value in that. So I know others will find value in that. So with that being said, we will talk to you on Tuesday. And if you have not yet joined one of our community Zooms and are curious, check it out. It's at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. That's the free community Zoom. And we'll put the link below so you can check it out if you want. And have a great weekend.
Enjoy the weekend. We'll talk to you on Tuesday. Thanks for listening.